The global supply chain landscape is undergoing a fundamental realignment as major powers adjust to new strategic pressures. This week's most significant move: China's newly announced export controls on rare earth elements and critical minerals, which has triggered stark warnings from the U.S. Treasury Department and allied governments alike. During a joint press conference, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent described the Chinese measures as a signal that Beijing is willing to disrupt global supply relationships unless its terms are accepted. He said, "If China wants to be an unreliable partner to the world, then the world will have to decouple." The export control regime will require licenses on the export of goods that contain even small quantities of rare earths, placing broad multinational supply chains at risk. China, for its part, defended the regime as routine export licensing aimed at maintaining security and civilian end use. Industry analysts warn that the move could spark an accelerated decoupling of supply chains away from China. Companies around the world that rely on Chinese minerals for everything from smartphones to electric vehicles are assessing alternative sources in Africa, Australia, and the Americas. Meanwhile, trade and investment strategies are adapting quickly. Firms are carrying dual sourcing, stockpiling key minerals, and restructuring contracts to reduce reliance on any single nation. In parallel, governments are responding. The US, Japan, the EU, and other partners are investigating joint procurement schemes for critical minerals and launching new funding programs to support domestic raw material production. Some of these measures mirror the logic of past Cold War-era efforts, but applied to tech-intensive supply chains rather than defense platforms. Global markets felt the tremors. Share prices of rare earth miners surged, while companies with heavy reliance on Chinese supply chains, especially in aerospace and defense, experienced stock price pressure. The U.S. threatened tariffs and expanded subsidies for mining, while China pointed to its dominant role in 80% plus of many rare earth supply chains as leverage. Economists say the broader significance of this moment is not just the immediate disruption, but the structural shift it signals. For decades, global commerce assumed that China would remain open and integrated. Now, many firms must plan as if access might be restricted. This has knock-on impacts for inventory management, logistics costs, and geopolitical risk premiums. Insurance underwriters, for example, are revising supply chain interruption models to reflect higher fracture risk from export control diplomacy. In the tech world, manufacturers are accelerating efforts to reduce China content in products, from circuit boards to battery magnets. Some are relocating manufacturing to Southeast Asia or Mexico, while others are negotiating longer-term supply contracts with Africa-based miners. Yet analysts caution, building alternative capacity takes years and significant capital. The immediate adjustment is likely to be expensive. Meanwhile, the global trade environment remains tense. The new export controls follow years of U.S.-China trade friction, and many observers believe they are a tipping point. A potential meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping at the upcoming 2025 APEC summit looms large, with supply chain security high on the agenda. Any breakthrough in that meeting could reset the tone for global trade, but if it fails, decoupling could accelerate. Energy markets are also reacting. With strategic minerals now in play, countries are linking energy security, raw material supply, and manufacturing in new configurations. Countries rich in critical minerals are raising their geopolitical value. Nations dependent on imports are scrambling to diversify. In Africa, nations such as Namibia and the Democratic Republic of Congo see new prospects, as international mining firms pivot away from China-dependent models. But the shift is not smooth. Social and environmental risks in fast-expanding mining regions are escalating, prompting concern from NGOs and regulators about labor standards and ecological impact. In the financial sector, banks and investors are updating models for supply chain disruption risk and geo-supply chain inflation. Analysts measure that some firms may face 10–15% higher costs for key components in the next 12 months. Credit rating agencies are revising outlooks for industries heavily dependent on minerals from China. Some companies face downgrades if they fail to secure alternative sourcing. In corporate boardrooms, this week saw major announcements of new partnerships. Australia's government signed a memorandum with Canada and the US to accelerate domestic rare earth processing. A major Asian tech manufacturer committed to building a new magnet production plant in India, reducing China exposure. These moves are not just about avoiding China, they're about reshaping decades-long supply chain design. The transition, however, carries uncertainty. Costs will increase, and efficiency may drop temporarily during reconfiguration. End consumers could face higher prices for electronics, electric vehicles and industrial systems. Governments must walk a tightrope, balancing strategic autonomy with cost, efficiency and climate goals. Disrupting the existing supply chains can also raise the pace of emissions if new mines and plants are greener than older ones. In the context of climate change and clean energy transitions, the supply chain shift has added importance. Many green technologies rely heavily on rare earths and critical minerals. If supply becomes restricted or costs surge, the global push for electric vehicles, wind turbines and high-efficiency batteries could slow. Some climate policy experts now call raw material security the hidden edge of the clean energy race. If China limits exports, it could trigger bottlenecks in green technology manufacturing globally. In response, the International Energy Agency and other bodies are assessing how mineral risk could influence energy transition timelines. From a geopolitical angle, this shift strengthens the ties among resource-rich nations and advanced economies seeking supply chain diversity. New alliances are forming around mining, processing and innovation hubs in Canada, Australia, India and Indonesia. Trade blocs are beginning to discuss strategic mineral sovereignty as part of their industrial policy. Meanwhile, China's response remains measured but firm. Beijing emphasized that export licenses are standard, but many international companies interpret the move as strategic signaling. For multinational firms, the key questions now: how quickly can we reconfigure manufacturing footprints? What cost premium are we willing to pay for supply chain insurance? Can we diversify without compromising product competitiveness? The answers are changing across sectors: autos, smartphones, green energy, defense. In summary, the world stands at a transition point, where the assumption of globalized, friction-free supply chains is giving way to layered, diversified, and strategic supply ecosystems. What it means: more regional hubs, more redundancy, higher costs, and new geopolitics of raw material control. For consumers, expect gradual price increases, longer lead times, and more transparent discussions about where your product's materials come from. For businesses, supply chain design is turning strategic, not just operational. For governments, the race to control supply chains, raw materials and technology has entered a new phase, one defined by decoupling risks, resilience, investment and geopolitical stakes. Keep watching World Pulse News for ongoing reports, expert interviews, and detailed analysis of the world's new supply chain reality. Stay informed. Stay ready. Studio Microphone World Pulse News, where the world speaks.